Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being at the conference. And thank you for selecting this session. I know this was I got some pretty stiff competition on the other session. So thanks for being here. I sure appreciate it. My name is Michael Belair. I'm President and CEO of the Institute for Healthcare Advancement. And our organization is a co-sponsor of this Health Literacy in Action conference since the beginning 5 years ago. So this is our 5th annual. Today's session is Health Literacy 101. It's an introduction. So if you are new to health literacy, or you're just looking for kind of a refresher on some of the basic concepts and data and notions around what is health literacy and why that's important, you're in the right session. If you're an expert and you're looking for some absolutely new cutting edge insights, no, this isn't the session for you. But we will do our best to provide you with that grounding, that underpinning of what health literacy is and what it's about in the next hour. Now, normally when I do these sessions in person, I like to be able to answer questions right at the moment, right in the moment, because I think that's generally a little more helpful for everybody. But I am kind of on my own. We do have a tech support here, but I don't have somebody feeding me questions. So my apologies ahead of time. I will save some time at the end to answer questions, but I'll have to push those to the end. So, again, my apologies for that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So just as an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. And actually, the way I chose this heading for a very specific reason. Most of the time, you'll see something like learning objectives, but that's kind of a complicated term. And I think when we're in health literacy, one of the things that we always like to talk about is let's put things in very simple living room language. So rather than learning objectives, we'll talk about what you'll learn. So today, we're going to look at health literacy. We'll look at some definitions, some components, what makes up health literacy, and some examples of that. We will look at some data from national surveys. I'll tell you now, some of this data is a little bit old. It's a bit old. The most recent one we'll be looking at is nearly 20 years old, but I think the data still provides some very interesting and valuable insights. And there are some other data sets that you can look at. I have a link that I'll share with you at that point. There's a video clip that I like to show called Health Literacy and Patient Safety, Help Patients Understand. This is from the AMA Foundation. It's a million years old, but I think the ideas and the concepts are still very valid and useful. And being able to hear about limited literacy and limited health literacy from the perspective of the people who live it every day is incredibly important and useful. So it's about a 7-minute, I think, or so clip. So we'll go ahead and show that. Again, we'll look at some statistics and prevalence of cost of health literacy. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about whether we ought to screen for health literacy. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So when we talk about definitions, there's actually, if you look, there's an article, I think, from Christine Sorensen that captures all of the different definitions of health literacy. We're going to look at literacy first, but when we look at health literacy, there's literally a couple of dozen definitions of health literacy. But let's kind of walk through this step by step here. So first of all, the difference between literacy and health literacy. These are very close concepts, but they are very distinct in their own fashion. So literacy can be one definition: using printed and written information to function in society, to achieve one's goals, and to develop one's knowledge and potential. It's essentially our ability to read and write, to be able to understand the written messages that we encounter every day, whether it's a book, whether it's a slide on a presentation such as this, a price tag in a supermarket, a exit sign on a freeway. It's our ability to read and write and understand the messages that have been designed for us. Next slide, please. So for health literacy, this is one of the definitions that I really like. Health literacy is an interaction between the skills of the public and the demands and expectations of the health sector. So if we are the health sector, it is really incumbent upon us to be aware of what are those messages that we are delivering to everybody. This is a note that I'm going to continue to hit throughout this presentation, that we, as the healthcare sector, we're the experts in this particular area. We do this on a daily basis. That's where most of us, that's where our paycheck is coming from. And we are very familiar with all of this information. Most people only intersect with the healthcare system for a fraction of the time. And so for us to think that they should understand every single thing that we say without the same training, without the same exposure, without the same repetition that we have, is just unrealistic. And so health literacy really is at that nexus between what people are able to do, what messages they're able to understand, where their level is, and the demands and the complexity that we put upon them. Another way to think about health literacy is about barriers, and how can we remove barriers between what we're trying to communicate and what we would like for them to understand. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of an out-of-date definition. This was the one used in Healthy People 2000. The IOM used this definition. Scott Ratson and Ruth Parker were the originators of this particular definition, but this was quite widespread for a long time. The degree to which individuals have the capacity to obtain, process, and understand basic health information and services needed to make appropriate health decisions. I mean, in a way, that's all true, but what I don't like about this particular message is that it's a separating kind of definition. It puts all of the onus on the public, the individual, the consumer, the patient, and really talks about, well, what is your skill level? How good are you at understanding what we're talking about? Next slide, please. So these are the definitions from Healthy People 2030. And I'll be honest with you, these are not absolutely my favorite definitions, but these are the ones that we are kind of the most recent ones. Personal health literacy, very much like that old definitions, the degree to which individuals have the ability to find, understand, and use information and services to inform health-related decisions and actions for themselves and others. When it's paired with organizational health literacy, it does kind of get to that whole little more holistic, integrated concept of health literacy. So organizational health literacy is the degree to which organizations equitably enable individuals to find, understand, and use information and services to inform health-related decisions and actions for themselves and others. So when you pair these together, it really does give you that concept of our responsibility and the demands that we're making and the ability of the public to be able to understand what we're talking about. So that's kind of for the field, that's sort of the most current working, generally accepted definition. Next slide, please. Our friend and colleague, Cindy Brock from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality said this one time at an Institute of Medicine roundtable on health literacy meeting. Health literacy is a state, not a trait. So what she's really getting at there is that our health literacy can rise or fall depending upon the state that we're in, where we are at the moment. As an underpinning, yes, our understanding of healthcare concepts and language and jargon and all of those, how the healthcare system works, that kind of provides our baseline. But the example that I like to use here is think about yourself or a loved one, and you are in an exam room and you're waiting for some test results, and the physician or the nurse practitioner comes in and tells you, we've got the results back from your tests, and I'm sorry to tell you that you have cancer or you have whatever other chronic illness. I can almost guarantee you that at that moment, your health literacy is going to drop by a number of points because your mind is not going to be focused on what that person is saying. Your mind is all of a sudden going to be going, oh my gosh, I have cancer. Am I going to live? What about my family? What's going to happen? What are the statistics? Am I going, what does the treatment look like? Your mind's going in a dozen different directions. And you're not really listening to that particular message. So your health literacy or your ability to understand, process, et cetera, has all of a sudden just dropped. So it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking with people. Your in a communication with somebody and you think, oh yeah, this person knows everything that I'm talking about, don't make those assumptions. That's probably one of the key messages to take away from this talk, is never make assumptions. Just always kind of test and ask about whether people are understanding. Next slide, please. So what comprises health literacy? What are the elements? There's more than this, but these are kind of some of the main ones. Reading and writing, people's ability to read what you said, their ability to communicate back with you, that listening and verbal communication between patient and provider. And I use terms like patient, but that extends to consumer, stakeholder, individual, member of the public, any of those. That back and forth communication is very important. And as the member of the healthcare team, it's important for us to really listen critically when we're in a conversational mode of communication. Now, like right now, I'm speaking directly to you, and other than the Q&A or chat box, you don't have an opportunity or a mechanism to really talk back to me. So this is kind of a one-way didactic communication, but quite often we're in that conversational back and forth mode. And when we're in those modes, and you know this just from your life, a lot of times people are just waiting for the next moment so that they can say what they want to say. And they're not listening to what the other person is talking about. So that critical listening when we're communicating and listening for cues as to whether the person is really understanding what we say is so important. One of the other elements that is very important in health literacy is numeracy, also known as quantitative literacy. So that this is your ability to compute and understand certain things. If a prescription label says take one pill 3 times a day, when do you take that? The intention is that you take that spaced out. So maybe when you wake, in the middle of your day, and before you go to bed. But a lot of times the prescription labels don't have that, level of direction, and so people are sort of left to their own. Interpreting interpreting and evaluating risk, understanding, what comprises risk. If a doctor or a practitioner says to you, by doing exercise, you have a 1% chance of survival. But if you take this pill, which costs $500 each, and you take 3 of those per day, your survival rate is going to jump by 100%. Well, what does that really mean? It means it's gone from 1% to 2%. It's still pretty darn low, but you're now spending $1,500 a day for this pill. So understanding risk, percentages, all of those sorts of things, these are very kind of abstract and difficult concepts for anybody to understand, especially somebody who doesn't, especially when you integrate those into a healthcare system or setting. And then self-efficacy, which is just sort of your ability to understand how to take care of yourself. If you're prescribed with diabetes and there are certain things that you need to be able to do to take care of yourself, take care of a loved one, you need to understand what those steps are, and how we as the healthcare providers communicate that is critical. If we do that in very complex terms, people can't understand what we're saying, and therefore they can't really take care of themselves appropriately or have any kind of self-efficacy. Next slide, please. Some other considerations are culture and belief systems. Those are quite different. None of us are exactly alike. And so when we're dealing with people from different cultures from ourselves, who have different belief systems, we need to really at least have an awareness of what those cultural norms are, or what some of those belief systems are, so we can work together with those individuals and build some bond of trust. Trust is so important in that communication between the healthcare system and healthcare providers and individuals. I don't know if any of you have ever read a book called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down by Ann Fadiman. Excellent book, perfect example of what I'm talking about. This is it was in the 80s, I believe, in Merced, California, which is sort of Central California area. And a young girl from a Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, Hmong family, had a seizure, and they took her to the community hospital. And from the very beginning, there was this clash and budding of cultures that the providers at the hospital said, well, she has epilepsy, and here's the drug for that if you take that. The family believed that there was a spiritual cause to her ailment and didn't believe that by taking a pill she could be cured, that she needed to be cured through spiritual means. So rather than a coming together of the minds and understanding and respect for one another and finding some common ground, they fought and clashed the whole time. And so again, it's an interesting read. If you've not read that before, the spirit catches you and you fall down. Also, other things to consider: a mismatch between what provider demand and patient skill level. This is sort of at the essence of what we've been talking about. What are we asking people to do? How complex are these tasks? What are individuals going to need to do to be able to navigate their way through a set of instructions, through a building, through anything that we ask them to do? The mismatch between the reading level of the individual and the materials. We'll find out in just a moment. Probably about half of the population is really not reading above an 8th grade level. And most, unfortunately, patient education materials that are created are probably at a 9th to 12th grade level or higher. And so all of a sudden you've got this really unfortunate mismatch between the reading level of the person who's the recipient of those materials and how we've written them. Health literacy has a very strong relation to health disparities and equity. If we are not being able to, if we're not communicating in a way that people can understand, then they really can't access the full spectrum of services that we have to offer. And health literacy has a strong relation to safety and quality. So if you're ever getting into an argument or a discussion with your higher ups about making some investments in infusing health literacy into your organization, into your policies and practices, and they're worried about the money that they might have to spend, a little bit of money you might have to send, give them the S word and the Q word. I guarantee you that'll get their attention. Just talk about safety and talk about quality, and that ought to really get their attention. Next slide, please. So here's our friend who has said, my doctor said only 1 glass of alcohol a day. I can live with that. Now, you know what he means, but you know what you mean when you say 1 glass of alcohol a day, but does he know? And a lot of times when we give direction, when we provide comment or information to the recipients, it's always a good idea to test what we have said and their understanding. For those of you who are aware of a practice called Teachback, this is always a good thing to use. If you're not familiar with it, Teachback, you can go on Google and look up always use Teachback. We have a tool on our website on the Health Literacy Solution Center. That's a whole toolkit. Always use Teachback that trains you how to use it. Teachback is essentially providing somebody with information and then asking them to repeat in their own words what they think they heard from us. And when, if there are any mistakes in that, we take responsibility for those mistakes, and then we try a different approach to the misunderstood concepts until we teach to understanding. Next slide, please. So a few examples of how this plays out in the real world. An 89-year-old man with dementia is diagnosed with an ear infection and is prescribed an oral liquid antibiotic. His wife understands that he must take 1 teaspoon twice a day. After carefully studying the bottle's label and not finding administration instructions, she fills a teaspoon and pours it into his painful ear. I think this is a very natural mistake for people to make. Here's the pain, here's the medicine, let's put the medicine in the pain. It doesn't, if the instructions on the prescription bottle do not say take orally or take by mouth, and a lot of times people don't even read the instruction label. So we really need to, at that point of contact with the individual, make sure that they understand how this medicine ought to be taken. Next slide, please. Here's another example. Mr. G, 45, Hispanic immigrant, native Spanish language speaker, has a job health screening. He's told his blood pressure is high. He can't work until it's controlled. He's given a beta blocker and a diuretic and instructed The label on the medication says take each once a day. A week later, he presents at the emergency department. His blood pressure is very low and he's dizzy. The doctors can't figure out why. One of the Spanish language speaking healthcare providers asked him how many pills did he take each day. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The Spanish, he says 22, says Mr. G. In Spanish, once means 11. And so he read that to mean, once take 11 and take that twice each day. So we have to be very careful, especially when there's that gap with language and the issues that different languages and language access can bring into our communication. Next slide, please. At a teaching hospital, an intern writes in a patient's problems section of the medical chart, speaks no English. The attending physician writes a note back in response, your problem, not his. Just because somebody does not speak the same language as we do, that is not their problem. That is a barrier, that is a challenge. And it is our responsibility as the member of the healthcare system to understand that barrier, solve that challenge, and make sure that we have a clear pathway of communication between ourselves and the people who are the intended recipients of our message. Next slide, please. So now we're gonna go ahead and play this short video. I would like for everybody to really pay attention. There are going to be some subtitles that give the name, the first name, and the age of the person, and what they do, and what grade reading level they read at. So that gives you a sense of their literacy. And these folks are just talking about examples that they encounter within their day-to-day existence. So Mario, if you would please go ahead and get that video, and we'll be back after the video.
Missed dosage and didn't realize it. I was in the hospital a lot. When they did give me medicine, I didn't take it right. I admit to it. I just didn't understand them, and I didn't have the nerve to ask them the right way of doing it. I just didn't have the nerve to ask them, and I didn't want anyone to know I couldn't read.
We had a child that was physically handicapped that I had to do physical therapy on. I would show up on Tuesdays instead of Thursdays for the appointment. I would be exercising the wrong side of the body.
I had an abscess in a ear one time. Well, I had to fill out forms and I couldn't fill out, so I didn't go. I come back home. I ended up having to go to the emergency room that night because it burst.
Can you imagine what it's like, you being a patient and sick, and you know that you have limited skills, okay? And you're talking to an intelligent doctor like yourselves. And these people are using words that you really don't know because they're not speaking in layman's term, okay?
Right.
Most doctors are just presuming that everybody's intelligent as they are, and that is just not the case. So what you do, you come out of that room, that examination room with this intelligent woman or man thinking, God, I hope I don't make a mistake with my medicine, because I did not understand anything he or she said to me.
One capsule.
That's right. One capsule.
One capsule. I don't know what this is.
Twice?
Twice daily.
Okay.
Okay.
So how would you take this?
When I see it's not on there telling you how to take it. It say take it twice daily, but it don't say what time to take it.
Which one is which and what you take them for?
That looks like my medicine that he gave me for the morning. I take that and the little pill that, this is this is Lipian, isn't it? Yeah, that's Lipian.
Okay. And what do you take that medicine for?
Don't ask me. He puts me
Okay.
on there and I just take it.
Okay.
Anything he tells me to take, I'll take it.
Okay. So you trust him?
Oh, you better believe it, my life.
Hypertension means, if I asked you what that was? Because when I look at this, I think, well, maybe you have hypertension, and I've been taking care of that for a long time.
Hypered? Hypered?
Like you're hyper? What does being hyper mean to you?
That's where you can't be still. You always got to be doing something.
Do you think I think you're hyper and have hypertension?
I don't know. That's what I consider it
Okay.
being, you know.
Okay. But you know you have high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but hypertension doesn't mean the same to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ask you if you have hypertension, you're going to just think, I think you're jumping around on a chair or something like that, something different.
Just being hypered, you know.
Okay. All right. Well, I haven't done a very good job teaching you what hypertension is, because I think you take that medicine for your hypertension, and that's one of the things that I try to work with you on is your blood pressure. And high blood pressure and hypertension, to us, is the same thing.
The same thing.
At approximately 30 or 31, I went into the gynecologist and complained about part of this not working correctly. And he said, we can repair that. Great. I didn't ask all the right questions. When I showed up 2 weeks later at the admissions office at the hospital, they put enough papers in front of me. I'll bet there were 5 papers that I needed to sign. Well, I wasn't going to say, excuse me, but I don't read really well, and I certainly don't read fast, and I'm concerned with some of these words. To me, it was lines and circles over sheets and sheets and sheets. And I wasn't going to reveal my sense of stupidity, so I signed everywhere they told me to sign. Never read it. And then a couple weeks later, in the follow-up office visit, the nurse said, how are you feeling since your hysterectomy? Now, I acted as normal as I could. Inside, my mouth fell open, and I thought to myself, how could I be so stupid as to allow somebody to take part of my body, and I didn't know it?
If you have a reading problem, you go to the doctor. That can be very scary. It's like a nightmare. You walk in that office, and most people, if you realize the first thing you're going to have to do if that's your first visit is fill out a form. Your heart beats real fast. You're scared. You don't know what to do. You want to turn around and walk out. I have.
You have panic attacks. Did I do it right? Is this done right? Am I imagining things? Do I go back over and check it again? I've caught mistakes that I made, simple mistakes.
It paralyzes your thoughts completely to think that you may say something or something is put before you to read and you can't read it. I mean, you live with that on a daily basis.
People sooner or later will discover, and that is your most greatest fear. Mm-hmm. What day is it going to be when somebody discovers you can't read and write?
I would get mad about something and blame them that this is not the right place for me, you're not respecting me, and walk out. And it had nothing to do with that. It was just I needed to cover that I couldn't read this. I didn't want them to know that I'm walking out because I can't read.
So you found solutions that sort of make it work, and hide the real problem.
Yes.
So that others won't notice.
Right.
Doesn't that take a lot of your time?
Yes.
Doesn't it take a lot of effort for you?
A lot. Very emotionally. Yeah.
It drains you?
Yep.
Okay.
I am married to an engineer now, and this man has some health issues, so we are in the doctor's office from time to time. We will walk out of the doctor's office, and my husband, with all of that left-brained intellect, will say to me, what did the doctor say? What am I supposed to do? I don't understand.
I'm going to say, well, one of the things that you can do if you have a really bad pain, I mean, where you can't stand on it and it's really getting in your way, is to use what I call, this is my little pain protocol here. It has ibuprofen, which decreases those little cells I was talking to you about, the inflamed part, and your Tylenol that just works on the pain. Yeah. And the I is for ibuprofen and T is for Tylenol. And this just shows you how to do it over the course of the day. For breakfast, lunch, and dinner, there's an I, so you use ibuprofen.
Right.
Because you have to have something on your stomach.
That's right.
With that one.
Yeah.
Because this one will irritate your stomach.
Yeah.
So in between meals and at bedtime, you use the Tylenol.
Right.
This way you get something every 3 hours. You don't overdose on either one. So it's IT, IT, IT. And if you do that for a couple of days when it's really bad, then you can just go back to your regular regimen. But this usually breaks the pain pretty nicely. So I know you have a lot of friends with arthritis. How would you explain it to them?
Well, for breakfast, I take I. 10 a.m. I take T. Lunch, I take I. 3 p.m. I take T. I at dinner, and T at bedtime. Is that correct, Doctor?
That's going to work just fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was following some of the comments in the chat. And yes, we can, this is an edit of a longer video. I think you could probably find the whole thing, yes, in YouTube. But we'll try to get a note out. I would share this one, it's like 76 megabytes. So we'll figure out a way for, if you're interested in that, just email me. My email is at the end of the presentation. And I will figure out a way to share this particular edit with you. But it's so important, I think, for us to watch videos such as this and to hear those voices. You know, I'm hearing words from these individuals like scared, terrifying, I'm stupid, I didn't ask the right question. And I got to tell you, it just breaks my heart every time I hear these things. This is our responsibility. We are the ones who need to make sure that those individuals, and everybody, but especially those individuals who don't have access, who don't understand the message, who have issues reading and writing, that we do everything that we can and some more besides to make sure that we level that playing field, that we provide that equal access to this information. And if that means asking them 3 or 4 times and putting it in different ways, making it available to them in the language that they are, their primary language, whatever it takes, that's our responsibility. And if you ever doubt that, just watch that video again and tell me that that doesn't matter. So let's march on to our next stage of the presentation and look at some data and some statistics. Again, as I mentioned, this data is rather old. The 2 major studies that have been done in the US was the National Adult Literacy Survey in '92. And then the one that we'll be looking at, which is the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, which had that added health literacy module, some questions around health literacy. That was from 2003. There are unfortunately no further null studies planned, but if you go to this website, the PIAC program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, there's the URL. You can get some updated literacy statistics for a number of different countries and including the United States. Next slide, please. So we're going to move through these statistics fairly quickly. The 4 basic levels that were used in the study to talk about literacy levels, you can see the levels there: below basic, basic, intermediate, and proficient. Next slide, please. So the NAL, the National Assessment of Adult Literacy study, had literacy findings and health literacy findings. So we're looking first now at the literacy findings. And in that study, the percent of US adult population that fell into the bottom 2 categories for prose literacy, which is just reading sentences and paragraphs, just reading continuous text. 44% of the adult population fell in those bottom 2 categories. For document literacy, this is your ability to look at a document or a screen on a computer and a dosage chart, a map, anything like that, to be able to find a discrete piece of information somewhere in a document. 1 out of 3, basically, adults fell in the bottom 2 categories. And quantitative literacy or numeracy, we talked about that a little earlier, more than half, 55% of the adult population fell into the bottom 2 categories there. Next slide, please. Now, here are some of the health literacy findings. Those are the literacy, these are the health literacy findings. 36%, or a little more than 1 in 3 adults fell into those bottom 2 categories, basic and below basic. 1 in 3 fall in the bottom two. And here's the scary one as far as I'm concerned. Only 12%, about 1 in 10 are considered proficient. Remember, there was below basic, basic, intermediate, and proficient. And frankly, I don't think anybody's going to argue with me if I say, in order to really function efficiently in the healthcare system, which is very complex, as a patient, as a consumer, as an individual, you really need to have that level of proficient. You need to really be at the level of proficient. And the statistics show that only 1 in 10 people are at that particular level. About half had intermediate level. And of course, no surprise, women's average health literacy was 6 points higher than men. So next slide, please. And there were 4% more men in the below basic category. Who has poor health literacy? Again, one of the groups that we need to look at, and actually before I say any of these statistics, my caveat here is to say that these are likelihoods. It does not mean, so for instance, if we're talking about those 65 years of age and older, if we say 60% of them fall into the basic and below basic categories, it means there's that higher bit of likelihood that those in that group, age 65 and older, have limited health literacy. It does not mean anybody age 65 and older automatically has below basic health literacy. This is an important distinction to remember. Those who have health insurance from an employer tend, as a group, to have slightly higher health literacy, while those on Medicare or Medicaid or with no insurance tend, as a group, to have lower health literacy. Hispanics, which represents about 16% of the adult population, represents about 35% of those in the below basic health literacy category. Also, those who are at or below the poverty level, which is about 17% of the population, that represents about 43% of those in the below basic health literacy. And here's a very eye-opening one. Those 75%, 3 out of 4, who self-reported that their health was poor, fell into the below basic health literacy. So these are some guides and some cues for you as you interact with individuals to help inform how you're approaching those folks. Next slide, please. Why is this a BSD, a big stinking deal? Next slide, please. Well, it really matters for a number of reasons. Those with limited literacy skills, these tend to happen. They report poorer overall health. They have a lower ability to manage their chronic disease. They tend to have poorer outcomes. They're less likely to understand their diagnosis, less likely to have those initial early screenings and take advantage of preventive care. And then the corollary here is they tend to present in the later stages of disease, and they're more likely to be hospitalized. And after they are discharged, not really understand those discharge and instructions and tend to be re-hospitalized. Again, tends to. It doesn't mean everybody with limited literacy skills exhibits these issues and behaviors, but there is a stronger tendency. Next slide, please. And now we're going to start talking about cost, because we want to tie some of these things together with cost and all of that. Now, a couple of these studies that we're going to quote, you will find people are very quick to pop up and point out some of the issues with the methodologies in these studies. And I'm not here to defend those studies, but I think what we can take away from these is that there are some trends and there are some larger truths here. So Robert Friedland at Georgetown University came up with the fact that $73 billion per year, and this is in 2003 dollars, is spent unnecessarily each year because of limited health literacy. Vernon and colleagues at University of Connecticut, a few years later, in an even bigger number, 106 to $238 billion spent unnecessarily as a result of limited health literacy. Next slide. And then when we talk about chronic disease, 2016 numbers, about $1.1 trillion in direct treatment costs. And if we look at indirect costs, which are things like the loss of productivity, people not going to work, those sorts of things, that bumps that number up to about $3.7 trillion. Oh, there we go, including the indirect costs. That's about 20% of our gross domestic product. So it's a big number. About 6 out of every 10 Americans live with some chronic disease, and 40% have 2 or more. 90% of those over 65 have a chronic disease, and 77% of those have 2 or more. So let's think back to that previous statistic where we talked about those 65 years of age and older as a group tending to have lower health literacy. So what you've got is a greater burden, meaning how to take care of multiple chronic diseases, paired with a tendency of those individuals to have lower health literacy skills. So that's that same formula of demand that we're putting on people and the ability for them to understand. It's that mismatch. And that space in between is us. That's health literacy and that's health equity. 70% of annual US deaths are attributable to chronic disease. And I think we have one more there, Mario, if you can click again. Or just go to the next slide, please. About, as I mentioned before, about 1 in 2 of Americans really are not reading above an 8th grade reading level. And most patient education materials are written beyond the recipient's ability to understand. These are some statistics from a JAMA study. 26% could not understand when their next appointment was. 42% couldn't understand the instructions, take on an empty stomach, and 60% couldn't understand a consent form. I submit that number is probably much higher. If you looked at if you've ever received a consent form when you went to the doctor and you didn't have a procedure, those are pretty dense. And so again, that falls upon us to have those written in an understandable fashion. And I want to take just a quick moment here to say, a lot of you working in a larger organizational setting may have legal counsel that you need to deal with. And they will be very insistent upon certain language being in there. The conversation that needs to happen at that point is, whose box are you checking? Is it your box as an attorney saying, I've done my job? Or do we want to check the box that says the patient received this, read it, and actually understood it, and did give us truly informed consent? If it's the latter, then we need to change this language. And there is a middle ground that we can reach in terms of satisfying the requirements of the legal team, but also having that language be accessible and understandable and usable by the recipient. Next slide, please. A few other statistics here: 381 languages spoken or signed in the US, 47 million foreign-born people living in the United States, 60 million Americans, about 20%, speak a language other than English at home. 24 million Americans, about 8%, have limited English proficiency. Here is probably one of the most insidious statistics, which is 75 to 90% of patients or people in the 2 lowest reading levels will describe themselves as being able to read and write English well or very well. Next slide, please. And then there's issues around cognitive impairment, whether that's, and you see medications that could just be a progressive in terms of any sort of dementia or something that's caused by a medication, hearing or visual impairment. So when we're trying to communicate, those barriers that get in the way, stress. You saw in the video, the woman talking about her husband walking out of the doctor appointment and saying, what did he say? The statistics are that most of us forget about half of what the provider told us the minute we walk out the door. And there's this issue around shame. We could do a whole lecture on shame. I think you saw a lot of that in the video, but shame is such a powerful mediator of behavior, and the lengths to which people will go to cover up their limited literacy skills. You saw plenty of examples in the video. And look at the statistics here. 67% in this particular study, 2 out of 3 people never even told their spouse that they couldn't read and write. And 1 out of 5 never told anybody. Next slide, please. Then there's this issue of whether we ought to screen. So I personally, and I think a lot of people within the health literacy space tend to look at or lean toward this notion of universal precautions, which means let's not make separations and say, okay, you guys are smart, you can read and write really well, so I'll talk to you at a 12th or 14th or 23rd grade reading level and give you these really complex materials. And then you folks over here who tested lower, okay, we'll rewrite the materials and make them a little easier for you. You know, the question I always ask people, I have two pieces of information that are two pieces of paper that are going to give you the same information. Do you want the one that's tough to read, or do you want the one that's easy to read? I mean, unless you like, you know, mistreating yourself, you're most likely going to choose the one that's easy to read. Let's all just treat everybody as if they are low literate. Let's make things, you know, the information easy to understand, easy to read, accessible and actionable. Let's just do that for everybody. There is a test if for any reason you do need to do a test. This is called the MVS, the newest vital sign. Barry Weiss is the author of this. And essentially it's showing somebody an ice cream nutrition facts label. And there are 6 questions. You do that over 3 minutes and that will give you a score. But probably the best one, Lisa Chu and colleagues did this study a while back, and they found very high correlation between how people answered this question and their actual literacy levels. And that's just asking a simple question, which is, how confident are you filling out forms by yourself? And if people say they're confident, that probably means, you know, that there's a you know, slightly higher level. The key is if they say I'm not confident or I don't feel very confident, then if you do need that that assessment of their literacy skills, that correlates very well right there. Next slide, please. I think we're almost near the end here. Thank you. So my email address is there. Please copy that down. I think we do have a few questions and we got about 12 and a half minutes here. So let me get to these questions. Yes, thank you. Please do, from Laura, please do email me, and we'll see about putting that into some central location so you can download that. Marianne asked if there are any plans to update the NAL 2003 report. Unfortunately, there are not, and that's remarkably unfortunate. But as I said, if you go to that site, the PIAC, the Program of International Assessment of Adult Competencies, and the URL was listed there, that'll give you much more updated statistics on all different, a number of different countries, as well as the United States. It's going to be around literacy and not specifically health literacy, unfortunately. But what you can see is that, frankly, in terms of literacy levels, the needle hasn't really moved an awful lot. So we might be able to, I'm not a researcher, so somebody's going to smack me on this one, but I think we could probably extrapolate that if the literacy levels are not really increasing, perhaps the health literacy levels are not as well. Where can we find the references for these stats? Thanks. I think I did list at least a mini little reference for the statistics there. Many of those come from the NAL or the Institute of Medicine report called A Prescription to End Confusion. A Prescription to End Confusion. That one is the Institute of Medicine is now called the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. So you might be able to find them there. It's no longer the Institute of Medicine. And then if you look up Institute of Medicine Prescription to End Confusion, that should get you that particular report. Let's see. So those were the questions. I think there was a few things in the comments here. Let's just look through those. Great book. Thank you. Yes, that was the Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down. And the prescription or the questions about people taking medicine bottles or looking at prescriptions on medication bottles. Thank you. Yes, I completely agree. The video is very powerful. We just really do need to always listen to and see those particular voices of the people that we serve. As I said, I think there's a longer version of this on YouTube, so you can certainly check that out. It's the AMA Foundation, Helping Patients Understand, I think was the title of it. Perfect, thank you. Yes, thanks for that. Makes me wonder when patients walk out of ED, whether they are upset or not, if they are just frustrated and scared about things, and maybe health literacy is the root of their problem. That's a very astute comment. And yes, quite often you're absolutely right. Let's see, some folks that I downloaded this. I downloaded the session slide material and the video is in there. Perfect. Okay, good. So just go ahead and download. And somebody actually put the longer version. Charlene, thanks for sharing that. Are there any general health literacy informed consents for treatment out there that could be shared with a larger organization? Those things are so specific to organizations and the condition or the procedure that those are being meant for. You could certainly Google that, say informed consent, 6th grade reading level, something like that, and see what's out there. Generally speaking, it's probably best within an organization to take your existing materials and work with someone who has done work in this space to do some rewrite on that, or do some work on that to bring that material down to a little lower level. Let's see, is there a recommended readability software for patient-facing documents? There's a number of different tools out there. I can tell you, and this is, I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll here, and I'm doing a really great job on that. It's a recommended readability. There are a number of different readability softwares out there. One of the products that we offer, and we try to offer as much stuff as possible as we can for free. I'm talking about IHA and the Health Literacy Solutions Center. And if you go to go to the website healthliteracysolutions.org, healthliteracysolutions.org. We have a tool there called the Health Literacy Specialist Certificate Program. And one of the ones in there on communication really goes through and reviews all of those ones. I'm sorry, that's not a free tool. We would love to be able to offer that for free, but we are a nonprofit organization and we spent mid-6 figures developing that. So yeah, we try to make it as inexpensive as possible, but those certificates will be quite helpful in that. And I would also invite you, if you're not a member of the Health Literacy Solutions Center, visit there and sign up. There's no cost. It's just a name and a password to get you in. We don't sell any lists of anybody's names, anything like that. And we have a discussion list, and you can post questions there. And the community just really kind of comes in and answers those questions. So if you want to get a personal recommendation from somebody on something such as, the readability software, you'll get a lot of responses and recommendations there. And Tracy, thank you for that, saying there are a bunch of free readability score tools online. Thank you for that, Kelly, for that link. As a physician, I do not remember one class in medical school that taught about patient communication. I learned it more by trial and error. How do you think we can improve this? That is a great question. And I have to say, it's one of the things that we are as a community working on. And one of the folks who's really leading this effort is Dr. Cliff Coleman up in Oregon, who has done a lot of work along with Stan Hudson from Wisconsin Health Literacy to outline the health literacy competencies that they feel, especially physicians, but all healthcare providers ought to have with respect to health literacy. And I think he may also have a database or a listing of what academic institutions with medical program actually include some of these things into their curriculum. The program that I talked about a few minutes ago, the Health Literacy Specialist Certificate Program, actually acts very well as a standalone component. So if anybody is interested from an academic institution about how to include that into a curriculum, please contact me and I'm happy to have those discussions. We also sponsor the Always Use Teach Back tool that I referenced earlier. And that's available on the Solution Center healthliteracysolutions.org. And that's a free tool. You can go ahead and use that. I would always recommend anybody who's a primary care provider in training or existing to go through and learn about teach back and integrate that practice, integrate that into their practice. We like the Fry graph, but there are many. Yes, Fry is one that I've always used and is very good. This assesses overall print material. Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. This one can be helpful to test readability, uses multiple readability formulas. One of the things that I think it's very important to remember is that while readability of a document is incredibly important, it's not the only concept. Just because people can read something doesn't mean that they can, it's giving them enough information to be able to act upon that. It doesn't mean that it's not so complex in terms of its navigability. You can write a document at a 5th grade level, but if it's 8 pages long with no headers and no white space and run-on sentences would be caught by that. But if it doesn't have those things that make it not look threatening, people are not going to read it. And there's a whole thing around design. I've done lectures on this that are 2-hour-long lectures. So there's a lot to learn around this. Again, the Health Literacy Specialist Certificate Program talks about this, but just keep in mind that readability is one component. And if really, for you to be successful, field test your materials. Try out a first version and get some people who are representative of those who will receive those materials. Just give it to them and say, what do you think? Tell me what, read, go over this and tell me what you think, and be honest. And of course, that's a tough one, but see what they say and listen to those critiques and then integrate that and have that be your iterative process. Thank you, B. Bang Layan, for the book's title. It's called this. It's not when, it's just The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down. Ann Fadiman. Thank you, Leah. Can you share the webpage for joining the group on health literacy? Yes, I can. That's healthliteracysolutions.org. And I will post that to everyone. There we go. Okay. All right. Still looking at the share the webpage. Oh, thank you, Charlene. You got me there. You got there ahead of me. Thank you. Thank you, Joan, my buddy Joan. Thank you very much. Kelly, I'm registered for the certificate program. It's great. Oh, Kelly, I'm so glad to hear that that's working out for you. Trina says the health literacy certification course is really great. Great reference. Thank you. I do need to just make a real simple clarification here. We have a certificate program, which is a one-way training. A certification is when you have letters after your name, such as CHES or CPA, like a CPA. A certification is when you sit for an examination and they test your knowledge and then they give you that designation of using the letters. That is not what we are presenting here. This is a certificate, which is just a didactic learning program. So the Health Literacy Specialist Certificate Program. Thank you for all the compliments about that. I'm glad you guys are enjoying that. I'm in the middle of taking the certification course. Useful, so true regarding readability. Joan, agree regarding readability, and reading and actions are different. You're absolutely right. Thank you, Joan. Super important to test materials with your intended audience. Thank you, Leah. Kelly Kidd, yes, healthliteracysolutions.org. Thank you for that. The certificate program is great. Thank you, Trina. I sure appreciate that. Jen, glad you signed up. I hope you enjoy it. And Rael, thank you, Leah, for emphasizing the need for usability testing of your materials. Absolutely. So let's just make sure we've got about a half a minute left here. So I think that answers all of the questions. Thank you all so much. I am so grateful for you being here. My email is here, so if you have any questions or follow-up, if something occurs to you a little bit later, please feel free to email me. I check that multiple times a day and always happy to engage with anybody. Oh my gosh, I'm actually directly on time here. So with 7 seconds left, thank you all. You guys are awesome. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and take care. Bye now.